Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and I'll tell you what, if there's one thing I love more than great businesses, it is young entrepreneurs who are starting great businesses. Obviously, I started my first business at the age of 19, and today's entrepreneur is light years ahead of where I was. He's a recent grad, but in college, he already won a startup competition. He's already launched an incredible tech company that is doing cool things for businesses in his local community, which is, of course, a community that is near and dear to my heart in Southern California. So let me tell you about today's guest. His name is Carlos Ventura. He's a recent college grad and founder of Cityvend. With a passion for tech and urban innovation, he's reshaping city living. Carlos is on a mission to make urban spaces smarter and more connected through his entrepreneurial vision at Cityvend. Get ready for the futures of city led by this dynamic young innovator. I love his company Cityvend because I'll tell you what, if there's one region here in the United States that has amazing street vendors, food trucks, all of that, then it's Southern California, and Carlos is moving and shaking that industry. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Carlos Ventura. All right, Carlos, I'm so excited that you're here. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here too.
Heck yeah. I'm going to tell listeners, you're doing this interview at 6 a.m. California time. That's probably the earliest interview any guest has ever done in this show's history. So I love it. Obviously, I told listeners a little bit about you, but take us beyond the bio. Give us your story. You're such a young entrepreneur who's doing big things. Fill in those gaps for us. I love your origin story. Share it with the listeners.
Of course, for me, entrepreneurship was something that I was not thinking about. Once I graduated from high school, I was set to become a pre-med student. My goal was to actually become like a doctor, an ER doctor. And once I graduated from high school, I decided to go to community college, save up some money. And from there, that's where I started to fall in love more with computer science. And once I went to community college, I learned more about mostly myself, really. And once I fell in love with computer science, I wanted to do something more with it. I felt like computer science was more of my life calling. And from there, I learned everything about technology. And I felt like with technology, I could be more of a help and service to my community. And going on from there, that's when I transferred to a big university. And from a university, I felt like it really broadened my horizon. I felt like it was a whole new different world. And that's where I was introduced to entrepreneurship, where, I have something in mind. I was very in school all the time, and with technology and entrepreneurship, I decided to mix it together. And I felt like I want to start doing something more for my community as well. So with technology, that's like one of the biggest aspects that I could do. And that's where I decided to launch my own company, my own business. It's been very tempting. It's been frustrating at sometimes, especially as a young entrepreneur, because I have the tenacity and also take my parents into consideration. Since I'm in school, they want me to have a good job and good career, but at the same time I feel like that's not my calling. And I feel like with entrepreneurship I have more freedom as well. And now that I have my own business, although I'm just starting, I have more freedom to do what I want and what I love, and that way I can start sharing it with my own community.
Yeah, Carlos, I love that overview because gosh, can I relate to that? I remember when I graduated college, I had already been 3 years into my first business, and my parents, I come from an immigrant family as well. My parents were telling me, get a safe job. And the safe job didn't feel so safe to me. It felt like I'd be missing out on my dreams, which is the most dangerous thing of all, to live a life of regret. So I love your story. There's one word that you kept saying in that answer that really strikes me when I look at your early entrepreneurial story, which is service. You clearly love being of service. You love being of service with the skill set that you have, your love for computers and technology, but you also love being of service to your community. And in your case, I love Cityvend's backstory, where your friend's parents, you saw what they were going through, their own version of the American immigrant story and the hardships that come with it. And you saw that gap when it came to helping food vendors, food trucks, local business stands grow. Talk to us about those origins of Cityvend, because I think that obviously it's the beginning of some big things that you're going to be doing and helping businesses grow. It's obviously near and dear to my heart as the host of this podcast, but really you're about being of service and uplifting other businesses. Tell us that backstory.
Right. So for Cityvend, it goes back to my childhood. I grew up here in LA, in downtown LA. And growing up there, I noticed that most of my community that I grew up with, there were people like us, normal people. They were working every day and waking up at 6 in the morning. For example, one of my closest friends, his parents were actually street vendors. And sometimes I like to help them out too. With my friend, his mom used to wake up like at 4 in the morning, and they used to sell tamales. I don't know, you know what tamales is? It's usually like a morning dish, but yeah, they will wake up at 4 in the morning, get ready, start prepping their food, and from 6 in the morning all the way till 8 in the morning, that's when they were in business most of the time. Really, Monday to Friday, they're selling tamales. And something that really struck me is at first I thought they were just doing it just, for fun, for extra income. But I realized that majority of these vendors, they do it for a living, and that's what they rely on. They rely on this extra income to support their families. And for me, that's what really struck me when I learned the truth behind most of these vendors is that most of these vendors rely on this income. They want to take care of their families. And although people just consider them street vendors, they want to be more than that. They're entrepreneurs. I consider them entrepreneurs. And as entrepreneurs, I wanted to continue to support these vendors. That way they can be able to sustain their business. And at the same time, although some people don't consider them a business, I want to consider them a business. And that way for these vendors to be more, I would like to say, more legit and be closer with the government system, since most of these vendors, they don't have the resources or the correct information to be more legit with the city as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm with you 100%, Carlos. I believe that not only are those real businesses, they serve a real purpose. Just go to Dodger Stadium, and when everyone filters out of the game, you're going to see how important those food vendors are, because everybody wants it. And I think that's really the fundamentals of business. Carlos, you and I both come from immigrant families, and we know that the fundamentals of business really includes finding a starving audience, whether it's literally starving from a food perspective or starving from some sort of needs, and then serving them. And whether that business involves a website or anything else doesn't matter. This is the foundational elements of serving people with your business. So I love the fact that you're giving them a tool to really connect with that customer base. I think it's a really important role that you're playing. Talk to us about, you mentioned the word frustrating, and I think that a lot of people paint this picture of entrepreneurship. You and I are obviously so about freedom, and it's something that motivates us even in those hard times, is we'd rather it be hard but us be free than have the quote unquote alleged safety of a job. Talk to us about some of the early frustrations, because there's so many different sides of your business that you're working on. There's the tech component, there's the vendors, there's the customers starting to use your app. Talk to us about some of those frustrations and challenges you've run into.
Right. Some of my frustrations early on when I first started this business was finding the right people to work with. And that was one of my biggest frustrations, because something I had to consider is if I want to find the right person, they have to have the knowledge, the experience, but at the same time, you want to work with someone who you're comfortable working with, somewhere that you can trust and be willing to help them along. Because as an entrepreneur, since I'm starting this business, I have to be the leader, but at the same time, as a leader, you have to lead people along with you. You can't just be a boss, because being a boss can work sometimes, but at the same time, in the long term, it's not going to be able to help you with if you tend to hire like other employees as well. And some other frustrations currently that I'm going through is with the vendors as well. Some of these vendors don't have enough access to technology, so that's what I have to work on. So when I talk to a vendor currently right now, I talk to one-on-one, but it is time consuming talking to vendors one-on-one, but at the same time, it does help me, because that way I get to know these vendors, like most of their backgrounds, where they're from, and building that connection, that relationship with these vendors is not just gaining a customer, but at the same time, it's gaining their trust And that's something that I want to build on with my business. I don't want to be just a technology business. I want to be a business where these vendors know who I am, as the founder, but at the same time, these vendors know they can trust my brand and they can trust me because they know who I am and they also know my background as well.
Yeah, I love that perspective because it also shows, even for tech companies, it is a relationship business, especially out of the gate. So I love the fact that you're getting those interactions with people. Carlos, I want to ask you this because I know that you are very ambitious. I know that you've got big plans for Cityvend, big plans for yourself in the future on your own entrepreneurial journey. What's your vision of Cityvend hitting that critical mass? Because I've been there in starting my own businesses. I know how difficult it is to get that up and running. And especially for a tech company, you need vendors on your platform. You need customers who are using your platform to find these vendors. You need the technology to facilitate and enable all of this stuff to happen. What do your growth plans look like in 5 years when we look back at this interview as hopefully the beginning of something giant? What is Cityvend going to look like?
Well, in 5 years, my goal for Cityvend is to take it worldwide. That's my goal. I want to be able to share not just the business idea, but at the same time, I feel like I'm also selling part of my culture. And with Cityvend, I want to be able to share with everyone, because I don't want Cityvend to just be something for any big time business. I want to be able to turn it into a platform where any entrepreneur who wants to start something, I want to be that first step to help them guide them into entrepreneurship, and hopefully not just start with one business, but if you want to continue doing more, hopefully they can use our platform. And that's where we want Cityvend to be.
Yeah, I love that. Obviously, a rising tide lifts all boats. It's something I say so frequently here on this podcast because I firmly believe it. I want to ask you this because strategically, I'm sure there's a million questions going through your mind as far as business model. You've already talked about customers, and obviously our customers are sometimes different from our consumers and who's paying the bills. What sort of business model are you picturing both now out of the gates? What's the business model that you're adopting? And is there growth plans as to how that's going to change over time?
Right, our current business model. So we want to be able to right now implement like monthly subscriptions, and that's just because since we're just starting, we don't want to be offering too many services as well. Like, for example, we don't want to be charging people so much. For example, like $19.99. If we offer a monthly subscription, is because we want to make it worth it, and we don't want to charge like any additional fees. But in the future for Cityvend, we also want to implement like online payment services. So I guess an example would be if you walk up to a vendor, instead of using, for example, like using cash, we want to be able to offer a platform for Cityvend where these vendors can have like a one-stop payment system. That way you don't have to keep relying on other platforms, such as PayPal, Apple Pay, since these vendors don't just have one, I guess we say, one source of payment. We want to be able to offer like a one-stop payment for them, to make the transactions faster and easier. We also want to implement, I guess you could say, like another monthly subscription, but with that subscription, it's going to be able to start using AI. So because we want the vendors to have more benefits as well, and not just have something to charge them without any type of subscription where it's not going to be beneficial to them.
Yeah, I love hearing your views of that because I think what I'm really hearing is that it's rooted in understanding your customers. And I know that listeners know that we always ask our guests, what is your zone of genius? And Carlos, I love your answer because you didn't even hesitate. Research is my zone of genius is what you submitted in your questionnaire. And what I'm hearing from you is already, I always say success leaves clues. Already we're hearing some of that research in action from you. Those personal relationships and interviews that you're doing with street vendors, your own personal experiences of that. Talk to us about the research that goes into it, because I think a lot of people, when they start their business, they just want to go. They just want to build things, and especially you, someone who's so good with technology, it's fun, it's easy for you to build things, but obviously the underlying research is incredibly important. Talk to us about how you're doing your research, what type of questions you're asking, what are the important things you're looking for in your research. I'd love to hear some insights there.
Right, when it comes to research, I get very excited. Sometimes I do get impatient. But when it comes to research, I take it in I take two methods I would say. So when it comes to research, my first step is to always do the research online. I tend to look at, statistics, any type of news media. I take all the information as possible and try to simplify it as much as I can. That way I learn about what does the market need, how's the market going to be moving. That's my first step. And then my second step for research is getting to know my customers, mainly by talking to them. It could be in one-on-one interviews, or it could be in a group discussion. But with my research, I have to take these two steps. Mainly, I have to know the market, because once I know my market and who I'm talking to, I could talk to these vendors and ask more specific questions. Because if I talk to just my vendors and ask them broad questions, it can be a good conversation. But at the same time, when I talk to these vendors, I don't get sufficient answers. So I have to do first my market research. And then once I talk to my customers, that's when I can ask more specific questions. And with those answers, that's when I start modeling Cityvend, because I get answers, and that way, more specific answers. That way, when I want to create a new feature for Cityvend, I can test out more products and more services that can actually be more beneficial to my customers, as well as for Cityvend.
Yeah, I really like hearing your thoughts on that, because doing that research first allows you to have those more informed conversations and ask those better questions. Instead of a lot of people, it's easy because we always hear that advice of talk to your customers, but doing that research first is really good insights. Carlos, I need to ask you about, here we are in 2024, and I think the big elephant in the room this year is, of course, going to be AI. You've already mentioned it in the role that it's going to play into Cityvend, but I think that when we talk about growth plans, I think that's going to enable more growth, not just on your business's end, but of course for the street vendors, for the food trucks, for all of them. Having an AI tool that can assist in things is going to be super powerful. Talk to us about the role that AI is both now playing in your head and what you want to roll out to your customers, but also in the future. How do you see AI factoring into Cityvend and the people that you serve in your industry as a whole?
Right. With AI, right now with the introduction of AI, we've seen that it is beneficial. We take all this information, especially from AI, and right now with Cityvend, since we are at the early stages, we want to use AI to start supporting vendors. AI should be the introduction, not the end goal. So we want to use AI in Cityvend by gathering as much information as we can, and for these vendors, and instead of modeling that raw data, we want to be able to give that data to these vendors for their business. That way, the vendors can start modeling their own business and continue to improve based on that data as well. And with AI in the future, we want to continue using AI. That way, these entrepreneurs can have better resources and more of a guide with that data, with that raw data that comes from AI.
Yeah, it's almost cool. I mean, I would imagine that in the future, they're going to have essentially a business advisor in their pocket through your app, where they can get instant access to an expert in so many different fields, obviously with all the data that is accessible to AI. So really cool that you're doing that. I want to ask you this, because I know a lot of listeners, whether they're in the entrepreneurial phase or they're in the entrepreneurial phase, we all struggle early on with the first question, which is, of course, market penetration, getting our first few customers. Now, Carlos, you already have some real life vendors on the app, which I think is so cool, through the relationships, through that persistence and hustle that you have. What is your plan for market penetration? Because I think your industry is essentially, or especially interesting, because it is such a decentralized thing. I mean, as someone who lived in Los Angeles for quite some time, I remember my favorite taco truck. I knew mostly where it was. It was in Venice Beach on this street or that street around these times, but I never knew exactly where they were. Gosh, do I wish Cityvend existed when I lived in LA to find that favorite taco truck of mine. But what is your plan in such a decentralized environment to start essentially centralizing it and getting these people onto a platform that can better serve them?
Right. So when it comes to street vendors, it is challenging. I have to be creative when it comes to marketing penetration as well. So, and one of my biggest ways that I was able to go into the market was really getting to know my vendors of starting off first. I want to create that loyal customer base. So I want to get to know my vendors, and my vendors should get to know me as well. So something that's worked really well is getting that early on, getting that one-on-one conversation, explaining to them what my platform does and how it can be beneficial. Because what street vendors want in the end is they want to get more customers as well. So I have to be able to get more vendors. That way I could get more users. And with more users, that's how you know my vendors are getting more customers, because they want to get that traffic in coming from somewhere, and creating a platform where this shows more activity and more traffic. And that's what these street vendors want. They want more people to visit their establishment, even though some of these vendors don't have their business full time or even part time as well. They still want to get that traffic. So it's kind of a two-way street. I have to focus on my vendors, but at the same time, I have to focus on my users. That way, it becomes like a third-party relationship. Everyone's winning in the end.
Yeah, I love that. That's why I never say win-win situation. I always say win-win-win, because you're right. When someone is able to facilitate those wins, it's always that three-way street on top of both sides of the coin. So I think it's a really important role that Cityvend is playing in that market. Carlos, I want to ask you, because I know that even early on, there are so many lessons that we learn. I would say that learning is accelerated, especially at the beginning. What are some of the earliest surprises to you that when you started your business, you thought it was going to be one way, and then actually doing it now, you're like, holy cow, yeah, that's something that I didn't even imagine?
Well, so something that I couldn't really, I would say, usually I was more scared about the technology aspect of it. That was really intimidating, because I know I do work in technology, but at the same time, it was intimidating as well, mainly because I had the idea, but I did not know how I wanted to model it as well. So I had to continue pivoting. I had a lot of pivoting moments as well, because when I come up with my idea, it was like, I know what I want. This is how it should be. But once I show it to the world, I get this feedback, and I was like, wow, it sounded really good in my head. But when I show it to people, it's not what I expected for the results. So I have to like continue pivoting when it comes to the technology.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to call out, and I love your transparency there. Carlos, I do want to ask you this actually, because we live in a world where there are so many tech tools, but you're right, choosing the right tools, building the right things, it's a whole world of interesting webs that you could go in any one direction. What sort of tech tools have you been leaning on as you've built the tech part of it out? Because I think that's a really important thing that you called out for listeners, is that's the one piece that scares so many people away, because obviously it is highly technical. Which tools have you been turning to and leaning on, or maybe building on? Obviously, you don't have to give away any and all secrets, but what are some of those resources and tools that you've turned to?
One of my biggest resources is when it comes to, I would say, working on my app. I really relied on Figma a lot. Because when it comes to the app, I feel like I've been putting more work when it comes to the design aspect of it, the UI, the UX. I feel like I put more work into designing, because although I am in technology, most of my customers, my vendors, they don't use technology. So I have to make sure that anything that I insert, any features that I put into the app, I have to make sure my vendors know what they're looking at, especially as majority of my vendors that I talk to, they're not very tech heavy on technology. So I have to make sure they understand what they're looking at and how does it work. So most of my time is always spending on designing and making sure it's not too technical for them, but at the same time, it is technical enough where they understand that my platform is going to be beneficial for them to use.
Yeah, listeners, Carlos is giving you a real life tool here. Figma is an outstanding tool. Obviously, so many of us are aware of what Canva is, and Canva is really easy to design social media graphics, brochures, letterhead, all of those things. But Figma, as far as UI and UX, two acronyms that Carlos just dropped on us, it's incredible. It's also, there's a free plan. You can start using Figma for free, where you can start building out wireframes. You can start designing your exact interface on Figma, whether it's an app, a website, anything that you're doing digitally. Figma has those templates, but also it's a playground for you to use as well. So I love that perspective, Carlos, and the fact that you've shared that with us. What other tools operationally? Obviously, we can talk about tech stuff, but what most people don't realize when they start out their business is how many different hats they need to wear. They need to be their marketing department, their sales team. They need to be customer service. They need to be building out the technology platform. What are some of those things that in you wearing all of those different hats, you've realized, realized, oh my gosh, it's a good thing that for me, for example, one of my earliest tools was QuickBooks. I was like, I don't know how to do a balance sheet and an income statement as I'm running a business. So I turned to QuickBooks. What other tools are out there, whether it's productivity tools or anything that you can drop on listeners that might accelerate their success out of the gates as an entrepreneur?
Right. Some other tools that I use, I've also used, I'm very heavy on Canva as well, because my background is technology. And with starting with Cityvend, I have to be able to also worry about marketing. And to be honest, marketing has not been one of my strong suits. So I have to rely heavily on Canva when it comes to posting on social media. I have to be able to create also content that's also going to be beneficial, but it's going to be relatable and it's going to also carry information. So Canva has really helped me a lot when designing any post for like Instagram, Facebook. So I would highly recommend Canva as well.
Yeah, for sure. That is, I'm just like you, Carlos. I love technology. I love computers, not so great at design. So I definitely rely on Canva quite a bit. It's a really good tool out there, which I think is important for everyone to know that whatever it is that you're good at, cool, go do those things. Whatever it is that you're not good at, you can always hire, you can always find resources. Carlos and I are living testaments to that. So I think it's really cool to hear those insights. Carlos, I always ask guests this at the end of every interview, and that is a question of advice, of action for our listeners. There are thousands of people listening to this. Some of them may already have their businesses. Some of them may still be stuck in that entrepreneurial phase. What's your best advice to them, Carlos? As someone who is taking active steps to follow your own dreams after college, I think it's so cool what you're up to. What's your best advice to entrepreneurs as they seek to launch or grow their own businesses?
My best advice would be take the first step confidently, because if you're not confident taking that first step onto entrepreneurship, that's when you're going to stumble, and that's when everything starts getting confusing for you. Because if you're not confident enough to start your business, you're going to become, I feel like for me, I became a little insecure and frustrated with everything that's going on. And taking that first step in confidence, it's going to lead you to more success.
Yeah, really good advice for every single one of us. Carlos, I'm going to call something else out that you shared with us here earlier in today's session. And that was, you said the word pivot. And I think that's really important to tie it in with the advice that you just dropped on listeners, which is not only to move forward confidently, but to understand that you're always going to pivot. 7 years into this podcast journey, for example, we are still pivoting. We're always in a pivot, adjusting to what the market is saying, adjusting to how technology is changing, adjusting to so many things, but keep doing it confidently, knowing that there are going to be pivots in the road. So Carlos, you've been a wealth of knowledge, and it's so fun for me because you are so early on in your entrepreneurial journey, but I know that I'm going to be super keen to stay in touch with you. We're going to get coffee when I'm in Los Angeles. Super excited about that. And also to follow your entrepreneurial journey. And I know that listeners are going to be out there rooting for you in Cityvend as you continue to grow. So drop those links on us. Where should listeners go to follow you and Cityvend as you're on this growth journey?
To follow Cityvend, you can follow Cityvend, and we have our website called cityvendhome.com, or Instagram Cityvend as well. Just look for that colorful umbrella.
Heck yes, listeners, we are making it as easy as possible for you to follow Cityvend. So definitely check out their website at cityvendhome.com. Scroll down below wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode. We'll be linking to Cityvend's website as well as their socials. And we're also going to link to Carlos's personal LinkedIn as well. So if you want to give him a follow, say thank you to him for sharing all of his wisdom with us here on the show today, then feel free to scroll down and you'll find those links. Otherwise, Carlos, thank you so much for coming on to the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.